Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for the opportunity of talking to you. I did say to one or two of you beforehand that I've never done this before, so this is a world first, premiere. We've got the red carpet, but we've got pretty much everything else. So thank you for coming. I'm going to tell you a few stories about my relationship to what I originally called water divining, but is now perhaps more commonly called dowsing, and my introduction to the world of the honeybee. And today I'm joined by Susie, who's my wife, a loyal helper and encourager of our whole honeybee sort of system. And you'll see some of our honey literally come off this week over there, which you can buy a pot at the end at a reduced price of £5. They're normally £6.50. And also Mark Herbert here, who's our landlord, grand title. We keep our bees on his land, so he's very generous in terms of his, and we pay him in honey, like the old tithing system. And Mark is a real expert in his own right. We had a fascinating conversation in the run-up here to get here. We've come from Kent, by the way. We're coming up from Tunbridge Wells, near Tunbridge Wells, at a place called Bedgebury, and indeed Coombe, and you'll see on the honey pots it's actually got Coombe written on there, and that's where Mark has this amazing place that is, stunning. Hopefully Mark gets a chance to talk a little bit about it later if you've got time. So I'm going to take about half an hour to go through this. Please interrupt with questions. It's very interactive. The world of the honeybee doesn't require you to wait until those questions get answered, but forgive me if I'm quite short in answering them because we've got quite a lot to get through. Okay, so where did it all start? My parents used to live in Norfolk, and in 1986 I was out in the garden, and it had this amazing weeping ash tree, which you can see there, and it was in the afternoon, about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Suddenly the sky dimmed in front of me and there was this incredible buzzing sound, and 2 minutes later you'll see here this thing landed in front of me. Now I'd never seen a swarm of bees. I didn't even know that they had things such a swarm of bees, but my mother was brought up in the country during the war, and she knew exactly what they were. She came out, she said, "Oh, there's a swarm of bees." She's very matter of fact. "Right, I'll ring up the butchers because they sell honey, and I'll find out who the local beekeeper is, and they can come and take them away." And of course there's a value to a swarm of bees. There's an old saying, a swarm of bees in May is worth a load of hay, a swarm of bees in June is worth a silver spoon, a swarm of bees in July is not worth a fly. And in the Middle Ages a load of hay was worth more than a silver spoon. Probably isn't now, maybe, I don't. And in July, if you have a swarm, it's not worth anything, because by then, if you're a beekeeper, you can take that swarm, take it away, and make a new colony out of it, which might produce honey next year. So I was completely overawed by this whole experience. I can't really describe it. You know, on a scale of 1 to 10, the experience for me was 10, and I've just given a pretty rubbish story, which is like 1 in terms of how this impacted me. But it was the beginning of my love affair with bees, and I've found many people since who have had bees come into their lives. I had a client who asked me to help him mentor keeping bees, and a week later he had a swarm of bees land on his office window right in front of his desk. They are extraordinary, the way they attract you into their lives, and it's that way round. It's not the other way round. It's quite weird. So that was how I started. That was the swarm. Forgive me, my mother took these photos at the time, but you'll see they clustered around the top of the fence there. And why did they pick that area? I have no idea. Why did they pick me? I have no idea, but they changed my life, actually, in lots of ways. And a short while later, I started keeping a blog, beelaw.com, to collect stories from around the world of people who'd come across bees and had amazing stories. I'll give you another one. A very good friend of mine at university had an uncle who lived in Edinburgh, and he kept bees on his rooftop. And he died, and the undertakers came round and put him in a coffin, and the next day the hearse came round and took the coffin away, and the bees actually followed the hearse to the graveyard. Now, you get these extraordinary stories in this world, which most scientists wouldn't believe, or if they did believe it, they'd come up with some fandangled scientific explanation as to why these things happen. But actually, that to me was an extraordinary story. And we've now collected on this site since 2004 from all around the world the most charming stories, and I'm thinking of putting it into the book if I get a chance, because there's a massive sort of wealth of knowledge here. You'll notice there I've also used the Isha picture of bees coming out of the swarm as a woodcut thing, which is probably against all copyright, but I like it, so tough. During the period from 2004, when we started keeping this blog and keeping bees, Susie and I, one of the stories that came in was probably the most influential for me as a beekeeper, was from a guy called John Hardy. Now, I'm not even sure if John's still alive. Does anyone know John Hardy? No. Now, again, this is incredible how these worlds are so separate. But John had done a lot of work on... He was a beekeeper. He came from the Midlands, and he'd done a lot of work on geomagnetic lines as they relate to bees.
Yeah.
And he basically said in this post on the blog that the world of beekeeping just doesn't get it. They're killing bees. Beekeepers are killing bees, right? I thought this is kind of a bit serious, you know. You know, I'm a beekeeper. I thought I was pretty competent at the time. And they're killing bees for a number of reasons. But the major reason is that bees naturally settle on these geomagnetic lines in terms of their homes, which, when you look back to the first story of when these bees came into my life, I didn't check out whether that had geomagnetic qualities or not. But as I've gone on over time, I've proven that he's actually absolutely right. And Mark came into our lives in about 2011, when we were looking to move our bees from a place that was far too far away, because we used to keep them in the village, but the landlord there chucked us out because he wanted to sell the land. And we had to move them miles and miles away, about literally 6 or 7 miles away. So to get there, we had to drive, and getting all the honey off was a hassle. I sent up a prayer saying, please find me a nice site for the bees that's close that we can walk to. And Mark came into our lives, and we've become great friends ever since. And Mark has this amazing oasis in the middle of Kent. I mean, it's a triple SI area. And he was kind enough to let us put our bees on his land. But before that, I thought, right, I'm going to use John Harding, because he'd come in and he'd said, the only way to find a beehive, or the site of a beehive, is to dowse for it. You have to get the location with the intent, when you're dowsing, to find a good place for bees to live, so that you actually put the bees in a place where they are going to be happy, because they're kind of they're a vibratory sort of organism. You know, at one level, we were talking about this earlier, at one level they're a bee, but when you get a whole load of bees together, they're a colony in their own right. And they like to sit on these lines. And not only that, they'll swarm onto them. Mark had a swarm land in your orchard, didn't you?
Yeah.
And we checked that out. And the swarm, when they swarm, they also land on these lines. So they have a complete map of where they like to go. And John's theory was that most beekeepers, they put bees where the beekeeper thinks, well, that's okay, it's a bit of an old corner of the garden or a bit of an old corner of the field. And it might be literally a few metres away from somewhere that's good. But they don't put it there because they don't know this secret. So John has written Geomagnetic Honeybees. He's written a couple of books. I've put some references into the slides on this. He was very generous in sending me a copy of the book. You can buy it on Amazon. The other problem that we face in the world of beekeeping is having virile queens that are, going to produce enough eggs to take the nest through not just next year, but 2 or 3 years later. The queen bee is the central character in a hive. There's only one, normally. There are exceptions to the rule, but on the whole there's just one. And she is the boss. And the way the whole colony binds itself together is through pheromones, smells basically. And the queen pheromone is the thing that binds the colonies together. The bees produce about 150 different pheromones, and each ones have different communication patterns and reasons. So there's another one for alerting and danger. And you can go to a beehive, open it up, and tap the side, and they go like that. It's like an electric shock, sort of extraordinary. And then as a beekeeper, you know that quite likely they're going to come out and try and sting you. Yeah. Whereas if you go to a hive gently and lift it off, and you don't get that bit, then you can work with them in a much more gentle way, right? But the queen bee issue, and this is a fantastic site for beekeepers. Dave Cushman, he's dead now, but he kept a whole thing on the whole world of beekeeping. And this was written in 2006. He said there are several problems around queens. The young queens are failing. Young queens are being superseded, and that's when a colony decides the queen isn't good enough, and they actually reject her, but they don't swarm. They just lay a new queen cell and create a new queen. And queens are just disappearing. You've probably all heard of the big thing about 6 or 7 years ago. The bees are dying, and if we have no bees left, Einstein says we're going to this, and it's all actually not true. A lot of what's in the papers. It's very regional, very local. Now, where we are, we've got lots of bees because we tend for them, but generally the US agricultural system is to blame in the States for the lack of bees, because they just treat them as another bit of farm machinery, and they kind of don't like that much, so who would blame them? But this challenge with queen bees, nowhere here was mentioned John Harding's point, is that actually 50 to 60% of the success of a colony is nothing to do with the queen, it's where you put the colony, such that the whole colony is happy to be there. And that is a massive connection between my ability to douse. Another story, Susie and I, we have a son called Andrew. We've got 6 children between us. Not all from Susie, but... And Andrew came out when we put the bees onto Mark's land, and he didn't believe in it. And I went down, I use coat hangers, I'm cheapskate, I'm Scotsman. And I can do it with my hands as well, but you know. And I went down the line, and I chose 8. I'll show you a map later. I chose 8 places for the bees to go. And Andrew said, "That's weird. I mean, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, you have a go." And I gave him the coat hangers, and he found exactly the same places. And he has this skill, but he didn't know it. So
he probably refused to have it as well.
No, he's cool about it now.
All right.
He's
My
cool.
son is very anti.
He's tuned in. Yeah, I mean, I have one of my other sons. I remember going into the garden, and just to sort of kiddie play, I found a 50p coin, and I hid it in the garden under the earth, so you couldn't see it from the top. And I said to my son, "There's a 50p coin in the garden," and he went in and he found it in about 2 minutes. So the skills that are there that you don't need. I mean, I'm sure you all know this. I'm sort of, but it's quite exciting when you don't. John Harding, this is a lovely piece. This was written on Amazon. John Harding is on his book. John Harding is undoubtedly a highly experienced practical beekeeper with 30 years' experience in managing hundreds of hives. His central idea is that the placement of hives over geopathic, that's the word I got wrong, stress lines, which can be found by dowsing, provides bees with a vibration which matches the vibration of the colony. In doing so, the bees work less to maintain their optimum colony vibration. That's the key. And that has transformed our beekeeping. Since we put the beehives on Mark's land, and I've done another trick John told me, is the other thing beekeepers are doing is they're keeping bees in half the amount of space they need to thrive, a bit like we're doing in inner cities now by squishing all the young people into a box, yeah? We are making the whole natural space that those bees need to expand and contract, yeah, much less easy. And if you go and see any beekeeping site, you will see they're basically selling you half a beehive. And so we're killing bees by not putting in the right place, and we're not giving the bees enough room. And there are a few other things, tricks we've learned along the way, like the beehives don't have enough insulation on top, so in the winter all the cold goes out. And that's the other thing, is that you get varroas and mites who infect bees who aren't in the right place, who aren't in the bee thing. They attack colonies who aren't healthy. Healthy bees just get rid of this stuff because they've got the right vibration. As I said, I came across this through divining, and I love that word divine. I think it's better than dowsing. To guess something or to discover something without being told about it, that's not really a very good definition, is it? We all know what it really means, but divine I like because there's a sort of connection up there to people. So I came into dowsing well before this bee thing. Does anyone know Jim Scott Elliott?
Well, no, I think he's not around.
He isn't? No.
I've got his book.
Yeah, I've got his book. And his son, Alistair Scott Elliott, was my brother's godfather. Okay, and the extraordinary thing is that Jim, my father was in a Scottish military regiment called the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, as was Jim and his son Alistair. And Alistair Scott Elliott was a near contemporary of my father's in the Argylls. And I got to hear about this because I was born in Cyprus in 1959, when my father was out tackling the Aoka terrorists, who were the local Greeks who didn't want the Brits around. Why should they? And Jim was asked out by the army officially to douse for terrorists. But it didn't work. And why didn't it work? Well, because divining, you've got to be like in the right space for divining to get in the, do you know what I mean? You can't douse for bad things. Yeah, in a way. I don't know, this is my theory. Anyway, it's in his book. And I read this book when I was about 9 years old, and he showed me the techniques and the coat hangers, and that's how I got into it. But it became a latent skill. I never really used it until I came into the bee world. I think Alistair may well be dead now. My father certainly is. But there's a nice, CanadianDowsers.org have a whole thing on Jim and the service he gave to British dowsing, which is interesting. I mean, again, I'm very new to this. I'm not a member of the British Dowsers Association. Perhaps I should be. But the whole thing here of that connection back to Jim, he was one of the early guys who created that organisation. And he had, I won't read them out, but Scott Elliott's basic rules, which are listed out on this Canadian website. Virtually all dowsing is seeking to develop the dowsing sensibility. I love that. Practice and test on demonstrable results, like I did with my son in the garden, so you can prove it works. The question asked must be correct, clear and appropriate. I love that. The intent you have to go and douse for something, you have to have that question right. And when I was doing for bees, you know, is this a good, healthy place to keep bees? Gave me back the right results. If I'd gone down the line and said, is there any water underground, I'd have got a completely different result. So that question is key, I think. There must be a need to know. You know, the mind doesn't work with all the left-hand side, left brain. It's that whole thing there, yeah? Have confidence that dowsing works for you. You know, this doubting, particularly with Andrew, our son, thankfully he kind of saw it work, but this doubting is the one big blockage to making it work, because you have to believe in it. It's essential to know the background of the field in which you are working, study it, yeah. Be bold in application. I won't go into them all, but, and as I say, the Canadian Dowsing Association's got quite a lot of the backstory to Jim's life, which again is quite interesting.
Can I just say that is the most sensible listing of what you should do for dowsing, all in one little package.
Yes.
Good. And everybody should work on the basis of that. Because it's just there, you don't need to know anything else. It's all there on that.
I always get stalled by number 11. Preconceived ideas, wishful thinking.
Yes.
I wish there's gold over there. I'm going to win the lottery. And it always gets in the way, doesn't it? So getting that in Zen beginner's mind is crucial. Yeah. So this is an aerial view of Coombe apiary. You'll see the red spots here, and you'll see they're not all exactly the same width apart. Some are closer than others. But as we went down that line, Mark was kind enough to give us a bit east-facing on the side of some woodlands.
Can I ask you a question?
Of
Do
course.
the beehives know that the other beehive is next door to them? Do they communicate with one another?
Very good question. When you put more than one beehive in a field or whatever together, one of the myths is that all the bees stay in their beehive, right? Some recent studies from one of the universities shows that 30% of bees will go from one hive to another. We always used to thought it was drones. Drones are the male bees. They get rite of passage to any hive. But the actual worker bees, if they've got nectar on board or pollen, they'll get let in. Every hive has a guard bee, and a guard bee basically makes sure that the bee coming in is the right kind of bee. But if it's a bit like you come into this pub and say, I'm going to buy everyone a round of drinks, but I support Donald Trump, you'll probably give him the benefit of the doubt, you know. So you know, it's that sort of thing. So back to your question, they're actually much better when there's with more than one colony. Not least as a beekeeper, you can keep one colony alive by using early eggs. You can move it from one hive to another to create a new queen. In our old apiary, which I haven't done here, and I'd love to do again, we had them in a circle. And there's another, I haven't put it in the reference, there's another really interesting book, which is all about the shamanism and the connectivity between shamanic practices and beekeeping, called The Shamanic Way of the Bee. And it's a weird story. They kept their beehives in circles for various reasons, but here, practically speaking, we had it in a line. So back to your point, yes, we get, it's called drifting. We get bees drifting down, and this year, they drift up and down, it's no particular thing, but one year you'll get a strong hive, and in this year, the hive on the top there has produced 4 crates of honey, and we've had a real problem actually taking the bees down so we can get the honey off. But some of this honey is, all this honey is from those hives. So that's the Coombe apiary. So here we are at this experimental site, and we've got 2 beehives here. And I've just dowsed for new locations, and interestingly enough, the first location is going to be, you see the box there, we're going to move it slightly to the left, and in a couple of weeks time it'll get another move to the left. We've dowsed for a location just down here, so there's a shift over like that, and with the other hive it's the same the other way, so we put another breeze blocks out there, and we're just going to move that to the side, and hopefully these 2 hives will end up in better locations than they are at the moment. So these are the 2 divining rods that we've used to divine for the new location. So you'll see that the rods cross over here, and at the moment the beehive is here and we get no reading at all. So that's the idea. So that's a demonstration of me dowsing for somebody's beehives. You'll see that they were both very close together, the beehives. Didn't need to move them very far apart in order to put them back on those special places, yeah, where the bees will thrive. And I did, before this lecture, try and find out from the guy whether they've been successful. We did that a couple of years ago. And since dowsing for our own site, I've done about half a dozen sort of helping other beekeepers douse and put their beehives on the right place. Yeah?
Could I just a very quick question?
Yeah.
With original wild bees that maybe made a nest in a tree or some other structure, is there any idea how far apart they would naturally space themselves?
Well, in Kent we have a lot of cavities that are perhaps even hundreds of years old. And I suspect that when bees don't have a choice of spacing out, they tend to go for places that bees have been in previously. Now, I haven't done the scientific stuff between, is this on a geospatial, what's it called, geomagnetic. I had another thing there with it. Anyway, this geo line. I don't know is the answer. I mean, there's a great expression in beekeeping, which I love, which is, actually, you don't know anything because the bees don't read the books. And that's so true. So yes, probably the answer is. That's me catching a swarm. I have got a video of it. I don't know, have we got enough time to overrun a bit? Or? Absolutely. Yeah? Is that all right? I'm probably going to do slightly more than half an hour. So here you'll see there's a swarm of bees. They're actually hanging down, right? There, and I have a box below it. Okay? Susie was taking a picture at the time. And it's quite big, actually. It's quite long. You can see it's like 3 or 4 foot long. Yeah? And the box we have here is a plywood box with a lid. And I've never done this before. This was a record for catching a swarm of bees in terms of time. So from now, you can stopwatch it, click, and in the box, and lid on the box, without squishing too many bees. And less than 10 seconds. So in terms of a record, that's not too bad. And you'll see there are a few bees there, and we leave them there, and they'll actually go in. Because once the queen's in the box, then the rest of the bees will go in. So that was that.
So how did they get in the box then?
How do they get in the box?
Did you open the box again?
2 gaps in the top.
Oh, gaps in the top.
No, I just I had a lid on it. You can see I'm holding a lid there.
Yeah.
And the lid.
Slots at the top.
We're ready now.
Yeah, there are slots in the top for air, and there's a hole in the bottom for the rest of the bees to get in.
Right, okay.
Can we ask a small question?
Of course.
What was the technique that you got to persuade the bees to come off from where they were to go in the box?
They're called the parasecators.
The secateurs. Oh, right, okay, thanks.
The bees were around the branch.
Yeah.
I slipped the branch, and they fell in the box. No, it's a good question.
And is it easy to relocate bees? Is there like a period of adjustment?
Yeah.
Can they not?
Yeah. That's really interesting. So there is a. I think it's a myth, but there is a rule in the beekeeping world that you can move a beehive either 1.5 foot or 1.5 miles. And the reason is if you move them like 20 foot, they get confused, and they'll go back to the flying bees. Will go back to where the beehive was. And I've tested that with bumblebees, and it's true. So someone wanted me to relocate a bumblebee nest in their garden, because it was in a garden shed, to the bottom of the garden. And we moved the bee box, because it was in a bird box, to the bottom of their garden. And the bumblebees got incredibly freaked and went back to where they were, because they're used to being there and they couldn't find the box, so they got confused. So we had to put the box back where they were, and then wait until they all gone to bed, and then take them 1.5 miles. Having said that, I've met a number of beekeepers who don't think that's actually true, and they've actually shifted bees, 10 metres, and it's fine.
But for example, what happened when you had to relocate your bees from one piece of land?
It's absolutely fine. If it's more than 1.5 miles, when the flying bees come out, they say, "Oh, I'm in a new area.
Okay.
I don't know where I am," and they'll do an orientation flight, a bit like when you move house. You move to the other end of London. Where we can get a pint of milk? Well, I don't know. We'll go out and do an orientation flight, and then you find out where you can go.
You are, okay.
So there are 3 types of bees. There's the worker bee, which is the ones you see in your garden mostly. By the way, these are honeybees. There are lots and lots of different types of bumblebees. Bumblebees are thriving at the moment. A lot of agriculture is bringing in different types of bumblebees for pollination. They're easier than these. The queen bee, you see, the tail's a lot longer. And that tail is designed to go into the cell and lay eggs. That's why it's got a long sort of sharp bit on the end. When you're looking at a hive which in the middle of the season or the height of the season could have 60, 70,000 bees in it, finding the queen is kind of challenging. She's also very clever at finding places to hide. She's quite an introvert, the queen, on the whole, and so it's very difficult to find her. She's not out there saying, "Hey, look at me!" You know, she's because basically the colony doesn't want that because they depend on her.
Do you follow the thing that you paint the back of the bee different colour every 2 years?
Yeah, that every year it has a different colour, and it changes every 5 years. I don't do any of that.
All right, okay.
The last time I tried to find a queen and get one, I think was about 6 years ago. I mean, some beekeepers, and the British Beekeepers Association think it's very important as a beekeeper that you should go in and you should know where your queen is and it should be marked, and there's the whole rigmarole around it. Complete waste of time. The best way to know if there's a queen in the colony is not even to open the box up, but during the period where the queen will be laying eggs, just sit gently at the front of the hive or stand just to the side and just observe the bees going in and out. And if there's pollen coming in on their little legs, they have little pollen baskets here, the workers. If there's yellow pollen sacs, or sometimes it's different colour, but on the whole yellow, then they're bringing in what's called bee bread or pollen to feed the young bees, and that's a really good sign there's a queen in the colony. And again, over-interfering with bees is another reason why beekeepers kill bees. So one of the biggest problems for bees are beekeepers, but beekeepers won't say that, will they? Because no. Anyway, but dowsing and beekeeping, in bringing those two together, we start to unlock some of these mysteries. So I just want to talk about flow finally. I mean, we have this amazing time of the year, the honey flow. I started writing again, and I have a blog called lawnmitchell.com, which is different from Bee Law, and I wrote a piece this week about the honey flow. But there is this whole thing of psychologically being in the zone, and this is something else the bees give me, and it's also something I think you get with dowsing, where you have this sort of intense and focused concentration on the present moment, but you're in the flow, and you're merging action and awareness. You're aware of your surroundings, and at the same time you're very focused. You've got a lack of self-reflective consciousness. God, am I wearing the right clothes? You know, oh God, am I going to get home in time? And you forget all that, yeah? A sense of personal control or agency over the situation or activity. You're in control. You know, you're the boss, yeah? And you are clear about what you're trying to do. A distortion of temporal experience. Yeah. Time distorts. When those bees landed in front of me, they kind of distorted my time. It's like being in a car accident. I can vividly remember when they landed in front of me, and I can almost. I've written 5 pages on just about 3 seconds. You know, it's that sort of intensive experience. And experience of the activity is intrinsically rewarding, also referred to as autotelic experience. You know that you're doing something in service for something bigger than just you. And so as a beekeeper, I see myself in service to the honeybees, and they're very gracious to give us this honey, but we've got to make sure that we don't take too much off so they don't have enough for the winter. These are my 2 bits of equipment, pretty cheap. Well, the ones on the left are coat hangers. And I have a little pendulum, lapis lazuli pendulum, that I use sometimes for other kind of dowsing things and healing, that sort of thing. There are some references there. I'll add to those references. Susie kindly got me the reference to that book, Simon Buxton. He runs shamanic training weekends. Susie and I went on one. In fact, when we were dating, I took Susie on a shamanic weekend just to see what she was made of, and she survived and enjoyed it, so she was okay. And we've gone on strength to strength ever since. So I'll leave you on a final bit, an unanswered question. The drone. The drone has magical qualities. It's the male in the beehive. The other 2 are female. The worker bees are infertile females. The queen is the fertile female, and only one in the hive. The drone, they'll move from hive to hive. They get made in special cells, which are a bit bigger than the worker bee cells. They come online. Literally, they start being bred in the early spring, and by this time of the year, they've been booted out of the hive and basically don't have a home and they die. It's pretty dramatic. Their main role is to mate the queen, and so their mating equipment's here in the back. And on a hot summer's day, you'll get a whole area of drones buzzing about. They'll get out of the hive and just buzz about. And in fact, in Mark's woods, I think we've identified a couple of those areas. And when you're out working in the woods, you'll get this intense buzzing on the canopy above. The queen will go up there, and it's a bit like Quidditch. She'll get driving along in a line, and a drone will mount her on the back, inject his sperm into the queen, like that, and then literally snap off and die. That's it. Boom. Gone. And that's it. That's what drones do. Pretty cool.
Temporarily blinds her in the process.
Temporarily
blinds the queen bee.
Does it?
Yeah.
Didn't know that. Thank you. So that's probably rape then. But anyway.
Yes, exactly.
Let's not go there. But one thing we don't know, and this is a segue into the birds bit, is how do the drones know where to go? Because it's the same places every year, year on year, and yet no drone talks to the next year because they've all been killed, they've all died. So a whole new generation of drones is born in April and dies in August, September, and be kept out of the hive. And yet every year, year on year, they go back to the same areas. It has to do something with the bees' way of doing dowsing in their own way. And I suspect so with birds. So I'll hand over to the bird man. Oh yeah. Do you want to do questions now or later?
No, do them now.
Okay. Yeah.
Vibration.
Yeah.
Vibration exactly. Is there a specific vibration, which means there's a specific tone, like you find in solfeggio frequency tones, or?
Yeah, there are different tones. There's a happy tone. In fact, sometimes I'll go into the hives, or into the apiary, and I'll go and just put my ear against it and just knock. And I can know from that how many bees there are, whether they're happy, how much food they've got, and I don't even need to lift the lid. If I lift the lid, and particularly in July, August, if it's an aggressive queen and they're not happy, then they go zzz. But interesting enough, having dowsed for the location, we get far fewer swarms now, so they don't swarm anything like as much. And in fact, the beehive in the north part of that picture this year had so many bees in it. In any normal apiary, it would have swarmed long ago, but they just held together. And they held together because of the strength of that vibration. And so, yeah, it is extraordinary, this connection. And we've got to get this word out. So we're not going to do it through the British Beekeepers Association, but if you do know of other beekeepers, and just chat to them about it, let's get this lecture out there, and let's get those who are tuned in to understand they can keep better bees by doing this stuff. Yeah. Did that answer the question? Sort of.
Yeah. So if you had like a sort of an amp on you,
yeah,
and it was matching the same frequency as the hive, and the queen was angry, so beforehand, if
no,
you played
it's
a
not
happy
the queen.
tone,
The queen doesn't get angry. The hive gets angry.
So if they're angry and you play the happy tone, like on your speakers, can you calm them down?
I haven't tried that, but what I do know is that the state I'm in will in fact
Really?
sort of impact
So
the
they
bee. So
pick
if
up
I
the
go in,
vibration, really?
if I go stressed and I
Wow.
knock them about a bit too much, they pick up on it and they attack
If
me.
you're not relaxed.
If I'm relaxed and I go and I work with them, they're just buzzing about. So yeah, so they pick up your vibration. It's the other way around, really. Yeah. Sorry, that's a man at the back there.
I woke up one morning, went downstairs to my front room.
Yeah.
I had bees in it.
Uh-huh.
The bees had come down the chimney.
Oh yes.
I don't know how.
Yes.
And so I had to get a beekeeper to come and check that there wasn't a nest in my chimney.
Yeah.
It cost me a lot of money.
Yeah.
But it was really strange. Because it was out of nowhere.
Yeah. I mean,
It's never happened again.
chimneys are a beautiful size for bees to go and nest in.
Yes.
So during the swarming season, particularly if it's got a cowl on top of it, the bees will find that void. It hasn't got smoke and stuff going up it. Susie and I, our biggest job of clearing a bee's nest was in a chimney actually, where we live in Goudhurst. And it took us 2 days. They had scaffolding up anyway for painting. and we literally had to sort of dig it out with a hoe in the end, and we killed the colony. It was no way around it. It was tragic, actually. I mean, had I known what was going to happen. So most people who ask me about chimneys, if a swarm comes in and goes down the chimney, within 24 hours, if you put smoke up it, just newspaper, it'll move on because it doesn't like it. It's when they get resident and they've been there for a few months or years. I mean, one of the local guys asked us out. He had a whole wall, and it was that size, you know, from that screen to that screen, behind a wall, a whole bee's nest. If you're into that, then it's major engineering and it's very expensive. So the best thing then is just to leave them alone, unless you really have to do. So, sorry, can I go here and then there?
Yeah. Geopathic. Sorry, you said that the bees like to swarm on geopathic lines.
Yes.
Because in the dowsing books I've got, geopathic lines are associated with human illness, incidence of cancers and stuff like that. It's fairly well documented in the dowsing literature.
Well, I think
they're bad for people to live on.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you say it's good for bees.
Well, that's why I don't know. You might well be right. All I know is there are good lines and bad lines. Okay. And when you go in dowsing, if you go in with an intent to find a good place for a beehive, you're tuning into a different frequency from, is this a geopathic line that gives humans cancer? It's like the radio, isn't it? And so to me, that may well be true, but we're talking about this in the car coming up. You know, to me, if your clear intent is to find a good place for bees to live, then you're going to come up with that result. And so that's... And whether they're both geopathic, I don't know. I haven't done that scientific research. But all I know is from practical experience and my own subjective sort of understanding of it in terms of how we've placed those hives out there, they've been incredibly successful. And this year, honestly, we've had a bumper crop, and the rest of Kent, beekeepers around us, have had one of the worst seasons ever, which just proves to me that what we're doing is probably good, and it's down to John Harding primarily. Sorry, yes.
Just very quickly, it's just a very fascinating talk and lots of things to think of. Just one thing surprised me when you said that the bumblebees are doing very well, and I just get the impression they're not doing very well in general in the wild at all because of the intensive agriculture.
Well, they're doing well because a lot of fruit farmers in Kent now bring in bumblebees or solitary bees to pollinate their crop. And so what happens is that they bring them in boxes, they do the pollination service for a couple of months, and then the queen at the end of the season sends out, creates a number of queens to go and hibernate. So
it's more like farmed.
Yeah, so although farming has its downside, that's what's happening in Kent. And in fact, they're also bringing in a thing called tree bees. They're called brown solitary bees, which are very aggressive. But in the old days, there was a direct link between honeybees and, you know, honey farmers being paid by farmers to pollinate. Now they bring them in polystyrene boxes and don't pay beekeepers to do the pollination service anymore. So there aren't so many beekeepers.
Two questions. One is, do you feed your bees in the winter, and what do you feed them? And the other one is, have you ever had a wax moth come into your hive?
Yes, to both questions. I do actually feed the bees. I've experimented with leaving extra honey on top. What I've found is that it crystallizes and the bees often don't take it. You can get some substitute stuff. I'm not so happy about it, but it's like sugar, yeah? But I do put those on early in the season, and what it does is it gets the colony going. It kick-starts the colony, but if I can, I'll also give them honey as well, and I'll actually take a pot of honey and put that on the hive, and I prefer to do that. A lot of beekeepers don't have enough honey, so they tend to put a lot more candy on than I do. I'm trying to use less candy, and it's an American expression, isn't it? You know, it's special stuff. You get it from, they make it in Germany. We could easily make it. We have made it ourselves, but it's just a bit of a faff. Wax moth definitely, but wax moth and all the other diseases and everything tends to go with unhealthy colonies. So
wax moth? Sorry.
a wax moth is a particular kind of moth that loves it in a beehive because it actually eats the wax. And very occasionally you'll get if you look at a frame of bees, I didn't bring one out, a frame of honey, they'll actually weave a sort of line across the thing, and then they'll lay their eggs. But for a healthy colony, they're kind of quite good at keeping wax moth down. But you will get wax moth, but it's only if it becomes, it's like anything, if it becomes too much, it takes the hive over. You tend to do that with a weak hive, or frames like in this case don't have bees in. It's just another insect, isn't it? I mean, they have this way of sort of sorting stuff out if you let them.
Yeah. Judith is at the Natural History Museum in London.
Oh, right.
Part-time, aren't you? So you get involved in similar things to this.
Interesting. I've read the death's head hawk moth that flies from Africa to the UK up through France.
Yeah.
And they have a very short proboscis.
Right.
And they're able to go into a hive.
Yeah.
And I've had it on my hand, and it was really quite frightening.
Wow.
But that calms the bees. It makes a sound.
That's back to your earlier thought. Yeah, that makes sense.
And then when they eat the honey,
Yeah.
they get too big to go out.
Ah, okay.
The beekeepers, this is in the south of France,
Yeah.
find lots, maybe up to 40 of these
Oh, really?
in the hive.
Yeah.
And what the bees do when they die is just wax it, you know.
Yes. I found one the other day, and it was in a cocoon. It was quite interesting. I'm not sure if it's the eggs from the wax moth, but you just take it out. So if you find it, you just take it out. Some people say you get mice in at the winter. I've never had that problem. We've had woodpecker damage. Woodpeckers trying to get their tongues in. That's quite a common problem through the winter. We've had badgers knock over a load of hives and try to take the honey. You know, this is all fun of being in the country. Yeah. Sorry, was there any? Yeah. Good.
Okay.
It was really
Okay.
very interesting. Thank
Yeah.
you.
No, not at all. My pleasure. I enjoyed doing it.
It's always an eye-opener. Whoever comes to our talks, you always find out more than you thought you would. So you've done the same thing.
Good.
How long would you like to talk? When would you like to stop?
I think we're out of questions. So
Could I?
No,
Sorry.
Oh, right. Sorry.
I'd just like to ask you. I come across Ralph Rösner from. He's a Steinerman from Germany.
Right.
And he makes clay beehives,
Oh, yes.
round ones.
Oh, yes.
And he said the bees do a spiral thing inside.
Yes.
And they will surround a varroa in wax to get rid of it and all that. Have
right.
you come across him?
No, I haven't. I'm intrigued by different shapes of beehives. We've tended to sort of stay on what's called the national, which is a sort of British kind of beehive. They tend to be boxes because you get frames in them easily.
Yeah,
As soon as you go to round
with a mesh,
stuff,
yeah.
there is a fascinating guy. I can't remember his name, but he's creating a whole new set of beehives out of tree trunks, and you know, Mark's experimented with this as well, where you hollow out a tree trunk, and then he puts a sort of hat on top of it, elevates it up a tree, and he doesn't take honey off it. He just uses it to re-wild bees, basically, back into the wild. And we saw a lecture on him a couple of years ago. Was it last year? Last year. And he comes down from West Country, and we're hoping to get one of his workshops on Mark's land, where you actually make these things. Again, that's round. The challenge with anything round, though, is it's impractical then to harvest it. But there's a whole vegan movement at the moment that thinks I'm criminal and I'm killing cows, you know, by taking honey off bees, and they want to re-wild bees. So there's a whole world now emerging of the young folk. No one in our family, they're not allowed to think like that. There's a whole load of people coming through, but it's good stuff. So they're actually just putting cavities back out into the wild, where we've taken a lot of the cavities away. You know, the chimneys and all these other places. In the old days, oak trees. I mean, Mark has loads of oak trees, doesn't chop them all down anymore. There's the hollows. You get, you know, what we're trying to do is encourage people to create more cavities for for the honeybee, and then they're naturally round. And I think in the bees will fit into anything. I mean, people have come up with sculptures where they put bees in strange shapes, and you have all this amazing honeycomb sculpture. They'll fit into anything if they have to. I don't know if that answers your question, but I haven't heard of the German chap. It sounds lovely. The Egyptians used to keep them in long tubes. In Africa, they have them up trees. In Russia, they actually have bee trees, which are handed from one generation to another, where they've actually hollowed out parts of live trees for the bees to be in, and that's been brought over to this country as well. So there are whole forests where people go in and take the core out of an oak or something, and then let the bees in there. But you don't get too much honey out of that. It's difficult to harvest that.
When you get older trees like an oak, the heartwood decays away because the living bit is the bit just under the bark.
Right.
So you naturally get all those places.
Yeah.
If anyone's interested, as a potter, if you wanted to do something similar for your honey, if you want to make some hives for honey, I'm very happy to, if you pay for the clay, I'll make it for you as an experiment or something.
Oh, we'll do that.
That's a great offer. Yeah.
I can
I'll talk to you about it afterwards.
So for £15 you can get your own.
Okay. We'll talk after.
Yes.
Yes. Richard, listen. Nice to see you again.
It's very nice.
Very good of you to come along. I know you're a very busy man. And you're going to have to excuse me a second, but you carry on and I shall be back shortly.
Okay, now Lorne has been absolutely brilliant, so let's give him a clap, shall we?
Yeah.
Now,